All right, well, we are in the shop today and getting back to work on the C6 competition drift car build. We've got to get this thing finished up and ready for testing. So, I mean, it survived the dyno, it survived the drive up and down the street, it's done all of that. So, I mean, technically we could probably drift it as is right now without doing anything else. But obviously, there's some safety precautions we need to put in place before we go drive this thing on the track. There's just some loose ends to finish up. Try to leave it naked as much as we can, just because it'll be easier for us to service anything that needs anything, you know, if we have any issues, and it'll be easier to spot any problems. You know, if some line's starting to get burnt after a bunch of hard laps, you know, we'll be able to see that more easily than we will with the whole body on it. So that's the idea. Obviously, it's not complete conditions. You know, the body panels on it will probably run warmer in all senses, but we want to do this first. If it passes this test, then we can, you know, drive it with body panels on it and see if it's good there. But this is, you know, step one. We're creeping up on it. We're taking steps along the way, trying to make sure we're ready for each and every one. So, that being said, I need to quit jibber jabbering because we need to get to work. We need to get the fire suppression installed as well. We got a bit to do. It's sneaking up on us quicker than we realized. So let's get to work. So the first thing I wanted to get started on was wiring in our dial a boost knob. So we had got it installed in the car, but now I need to make a connector and wire it up to the ECU itself so it can actually do its thing, dial the boost. So the idea behind this knob is that we can change the boost level just by a knob that I can reach sitting in the car, which means we can change it for any given circumstance, obviously from track to track easily, but even from battle to battle. So while I was working on that, Josue was trying to figure out a good way to mount our eyelets for our lap belts. There's just not a good place to put them in this car. We were kind of struggling to come up with an idea, and collectively we came up with a decent idea that should work. So he got to work on that, and I got to work on finishing up this little harness. Piece of cake. Once you've wired a whole car with all of these same parts and pieces, you have everything you need and stuff goes together pretty smooth. So we got that in, got it installed, and now we can dial our boost. All right, I've got our dial a boost all set up. So we've got our table here. It's RPM versus the dial a boost. There's not much variation in the RPM, but we can change this. We can have more duty cycle down low if we need to try to get it to ramp faster, or less if we want to ramp it in more linearly. We can taper it off at the top if, you know, it wants to climb. We got a lot of options there. They're pretty similar. You know, we go from 39 to 40.4. But what you're mainly looking at is down here. So this is the duty cycle of the boost controller. We've maxed it at basically 70, 75, which we know is a little over 15 pounds of boost, which was the max we ran the car to. So as I click here, you see that little dot move, and that's where our boost controller, that's what our duty cycle is going to be to our boost control solenoid. And then obviously that dot would move with RPM too. Sweet, so it's all set up. So with the dial a boost done, wired up, and working as it should, I moved on to bending these brackets for Josue. This is kind of what we came up with, is these little brackets that are going to bolt to the seat rail. This press brake with the air over hydraulic ram, definitely life-changing. Makes quick work of bending some 1/8" plate steel. So while I was in the middle of doing other stuff, I noticed that it was sunny outside. So I started hustling and getting ready to finally paint my trans-tunnel stuff. This has been on the agenda for a while. We kind of put it off because we wanted to paint everything the chassis color, which requires, you know, mixing the paint and setting up a paint booth, essentially, because this is a lot messier than spray paint. And we wanted to do it all at once. So it's one of those things where it's coming down to the wire. We need to get this stuff painted. Otherwise, we're going to have to seal it up, put it on just to take it back apart, pull the sealer off just so we can paint it. Not ideal. I wanted to get this done and dusted and it be finished. So we set up our outside paint booth. This is where we normally spray paint stuff, but first time painting out there with a gun, just had to run the air hose through the window, and, you know, is it silly if it works? Because, it worked. So once we got back inside, while I was letting that stuff dry so we could see how it turned out, I moved on to mounting our new front tires. So luckily, we have a nice tire machine. I've been mounting tires for a very, very long time. I've always mounted my own tires. And man, using a nice tire machine with the power arm as opposed to using what I used to use, like the most basic of basic tire machines, life-changing. I mean, back in the day, in the early days when I first started drifting, we used a manual tire machine, which if you've ever tried to put a big tire on a wide wheel with a manual tire machine, you know it is not a fun time. So I just, as much as mounting tires is tough sometimes because it's always super last minute, you know, it's always right before an event, it is, I do always take a moment to appreciate having a nice tire machine because it does make the job a lot easier. So we get those mounted, we get them tossed back on the car, and now it's time to see how our paint project turned out. All right, we've made some really good progress. We've only got today left to get this thing ready for testing tomorrow. We're going testing tomorrow afternoon, so like we got to get our hustle on and get all the mandatory stuff done. So I went ahead and got the tires swapped over to the NTO1s. This is what I plan to run on the front from the beginning. We were testing with the other tires to see sizing, and we ended up landing on a 245, just a little bit narrower than the other tire. And that's because we're going to go a little bit smaller on the wheel to maximize all the angle that this angle kit offers. We still have a ton right now with it as it is, but you know, if we can get a little more out of it, we might as well. So this tire combo with like an inch narrower wheel should be pretty spot on. But at least for now, we have the tires we intend to run. These are a lot stickier than the other tires we had on here, which we're going to need all the front grip we can get with these Larry Hoovers on the back. These things make a ton of grip, and I want to make sure that we have enough front grip to match it. Front grip's really important to me. Some people prefer like low front grip, and I've tried it both ways. I just switched back to high front grip on the Miata, and the car felt a million times better to me with a lot of front grip. So I'm sticking to what I know and what I believe and what I like, and that is good front grip. It's the same tire I run on the Miata. It's a snazzy look. It makes it look a little more race car. So got that done. We did manage to get our stuff painted. This has been, well, like almost a week in the making of us waiting to paint this stuff. We got it taken off, we got it cleaned up, and the Florida weather just did not cooperate. It just rained every day. So I saw a little gap in the rain. I was actually working on something else, looked out the window, saw it was bright and sunny, started hustling, getting everything set up, and before I could even start spraying, I saw the clouds rolling in, and I was like, oh no. So we hustled, and we did manage to get it done. I literally brought them back in while they were still wet and just avoided the rain. But that being said, some mistakes were made in the process. One, we didn't have time to use primer on these inner fenders, and we didn't have time to really prep them. We did like a 2-minute prep on each one, and we just had some separation here and there. Not a huge deal. In my opinion, still better than them being, you know, dirty in the old color. The bigger problem is when I went to mix the paint, I didn't stir the paint in the can up well enough before I put it in the mixing cup and mixed it. And because of that, some of the colors separated. So we didn't get quite the right mixture of color just to get Nardo gray. We've got essentially Nardo brown. But the paint itself came out pretty nice, so that's good. On all the metal stuff, it's clean, there's no runs. So I'm happy with that for spraying it outside on a park bench, but it's a little different color, but that's okay. This is definitely better than it being rusty, and the biggest thing is it means we can finally put our sealant on those pieces, put them back in, and seal up the tunnel and have the cockpit fully sealed up, which obviously we need to have done before we go drive this thing. While I was working on that, Jose was working on our seat harness brackets for our eyelets. So we have clip-in harnesses, and getting the angle right is important. It's real tricky in this car because the floor is fiberglass. So even with a big sandwich plate nut on the bottom, I don't trust just bolting through the floor. So we made brackets that bolt to the seat brackets themselves. So he got those brackets made, whipped up, nice tight fit up. So while he's working on installing those, finishing up the harnesses, which is obviously just as crucial as sealing the trans tunnel, I'm gonna work on sealing the trans tunnel. So moral of the story is, I need to quit jibber jabbering for sure and need to get back to work. So for sealing these pieces up, I got quite a few different things to do it. So that way, no matter what, we would have something that would work. And the reason why these are removable is for serviceability. Both the trans tunnel itself and this plate that goes over the shifter area. If we have any shift linkage issues, we can take that plate off and get to everything up top. If we need to get to the top bell housing bolts to pull the trans out and we're struggling to get to them from underneath, boom, we pull this plate off with a few bolts and we're good to go. But that being said, we want to make sure these are sealed and that the cabin is sealed. So I originally was trying to do this weather stripping, this U-channel rubber around the outside as well as the foam on the inside. And of course, to install it, we have to remove the dash, which, you know, we finally got this dash mounted and secured and finalized, and we've had to remove it another 4 times after that, which is usually how it goes with projects like this. But we pulled the dash out and went to put this trans tunnel plate back in, and it was just not happening. The rubber just added too much thickness. It was pretty tight as is, so it wasn't going to work. So what I did was I took it back out and went with my original plan of just using foam all around the perimeter to seal it, and that worked pretty well. It's nice and tight. We still had to squish it down onto the foam to get the bolts in, so it should hold a nice tight seal and keep us separated from the elements and the engine-based stuff while we're in the car. So with the main thing back on, which is the tunnel that we made, it's time to put the handbrake assembly back on and the shifter plate back on. So we've got this bracket here. That's where our handle bolts into, and then our rod goes back to a separate master cylinder in the back to keep it out of the way. I really like doing these separated handbrake setups. I don't know why. It's just cleaner, easier. It keeps things more out of the way. That's my opinion on it. It's the way I like to do it. So we get all that assembled back together, easy peasy. You know, this stuff's already been together, so it's not a big deal to put it back together, but now it's all painted at least, even if it is the wrong color. So the next thing was the fire suppression system. That was really the last big thing. Josue got the harnesses buttoned up, and now we need a fire suppression system. You know, if there's any time where the car is most likely to set on fire, it is at a test day. Like, that is the most likely time. So we wanted to make sure that we got this installed. I had been holding off because I wanted to switch to a bigger system and actually put this system in my Miata, but the time came down to it. I slacked on getting another one, and we just had to install this one, which is big enough. I mean, it's the right size for what we're doing. It's perfectly rated. It's pretty much the size everyone runs, but you know, bigger's always better, right? So Josue was working on getting the nozzles done and getting the bottle mounted, and I was working on the pull cable. We are going to have 2 pull cables, one for the outside and one for me on the inside. So I had to make a little bracket. I had to unbolt the rocker, drill a hole, put a rib nut in to bolt the bracket in, to put the cable end in so that I have a cable right there next to me that I can pull up and activate the system. So with that done and all of our other painted parts back on, I really wanted to see how these fender arches looked with the Nardo tan. All right, well, we decided to put the passenger seat on the low priority list and the fire suppression on the high priority list. So we've got our rear nozzle there, my pull here. I would have liked to have routed it up here so you could get it from out of the car too, but it wasn't long enough, so I put it down here. We do have a second cable that will route out to wherever we final install this kill switch button. So you'll have kill switch button and fire cable, but we've got to get the wipers working and get the cowl in to figure that out. Overall, not too bad. I'm real disappointed in my paint though. It almost looks worse than if I just painted it black because it's close but not. Especially the fenders. Now that I got the fenders in. Yeah, we're gonna have to repaint these when we get some time, unfortunately, because this is ugly. This is gonna bug the crap out of me. So Josue was working on finishing up our front nozzles. We had came up with a good plan. I'd got some extra tees so that we could do it nice and clean and how we wanted them, and we're basically splitting them behind the dash to keep all of the lines inside. Ideally, keep them protected from fire. So luckily these are meant to be easy to install. So it took us a bit, but it really wasn't too huge of a deal of a project. So while he was working on that, I need to mount tires, right? We can't go drifting without a bunch of tires. Now, unfortunately, I've slacked on getting my drift wheels, my multiple sets of rears that we're going to need to run this car. So I had to steal the brand new wheels and tires that were meant for the Zafiro to mount the 315s for the Vette on them so that we could use them and have some tires for the test day. Now, I was really conflicted on which tires to use. I have used tires, used scrubs of all different variation, you know, from 1 lap left in them to almost brand new. And I wanted to burn through all the lowest life ones first because we're just testing and shaking down the car. But we don't really have enough wheels to bring, 10 pairs of tires. So I had to pick and choose and kind of go middle of the road. Hopefully it works out. All right, we have been straight hustling on this thing, trying to get it finished up, but I think we are ready. We've got the dash back in officially. We even got to peel the plastic off the digital dash and the chill out controller. What a nice feeling. I hope I didn't jinx myself by doing that. You always want to wait until you're done taking stuff on and off to peel the plastic, but sometimes when you peel it, then you got to pull it back off. But harnesses are in and adjusted. Fire suppression system is done. You can see we've got the bottle right there, worked out really well. Mounting it there. There's not a lot of space left in this car, so that was a good spot for it. We've got a nozzle down here spraying me. Got a nozzle back here spraying the fuel cell. We've got a nozzle here spraying a passenger for those rare times where I have a passenger. And then we've got one spraying each bank, basically. There and there. So that worked out really well. It was a quick install. Didn't have a lot of time to do it, and it turned out, you know, about as good as I could have hoped. So I'm real happy with that. But yeah, everything as far as I know is ready to go. There's nothing left to it but to do it. So one thing I wanted to do was I was working on adding a safety. So we have a boost cut safety. So if we make too much boost, it'll cut ignition. But I wanted to add an air fuel safety. Now, safeties in competition cars, drift cars in general, but specifically comp cars, are kind of a double-edged sword because on one hand, you would obviously save the engine, right? If the car's trying to lean out at 15 pounds of boost or something, you know, that would be ideal for it to cut ignition. But if you're in a tandem comp and you're in a battle and someone's on your door and you're going 80 miles an hour and your car just shuts off, they're likely gonna plow into you. You're gonna wreck both cars. Not good. I mean, sometimes, most times, probably a lot worse than engine damage. Even if you're by yourself, depending on the track, you know, if you're on a bank track, and you got any bit of grip in the car, if you just let off the throttle, you're going into the wall. So it's tough. It's kind of like pick your poison with safeties. But since we were just testing this car and we're working out the bugs and we're most likely to have problems now, we might as well run some safeties. And that way, you know, if anything goes wrong, the car will do its job to take care of things, because I'm going to have my hands full just trying to learn the car, get comfortable, pay attention to other stuff. So one thing though, I was going through the data logs that Kevin sent me from the dyno session and really, really happy. So I checked over some stuff, kind of see where our baseline was, you know, that way I can look at them after this event, after this test day, and see if anything changed. And we looked at some things that I hadn't really looked at on the dyno, and I'm really happy with what I've seen. So the first thing is EGTs. You know, there's a lot of criticism when I built these headers from people who've probably never built headers, that the EGTs were gonna be all over the place. And what do you know? They're all within 50 to 100 degrees of each other pretty much the whole way through. Like if we look here, peak load, peak boost, you know, 1430, 1386, 1450. I mean, you can see they're all real solid. So that was really exciting. But what was even more exciting to me is the crankcase pressure. So this is something I forgot to even really check while we were there, but we have a sensor monitoring crankcase pressure, which, as most of you know, you always have positive pressure in the crankcase from blow-by. Even stock cars have this. Now in race cars, you normally run a line off the valve cover to a catch can to relieve that pressure. On this car, we don't have that. We have a vacuum regulator and a pop-off valve. So the vacuum regulator opens if there's too much vacuum, the pop-off valve opens if there's too much positive pressure. So each way, and that's it. We don't have any lines, we don't have a catch can. And the reason for that is because we have, you can't even see it, but a big heavy-duty high vacuum 5-stage dry sump. While that is sucking the oil out of the engine to return it to the tank, it's creating a vacuum in the crankcase. So my hope and the unknown was, will it create enough vacuum to offset all the blow-by and positive pressure from the boost? Because if not, then we would have to ditch this filter setup, because that would be opening all the time and we'd have to run that and put a catch can somewhere. It would just not be ideal. This is one of my favorite things about this setup, is that we don't have to have two big 12AN lines. We don't have a catch can that's constantly getting full. So I was hoping that this system would work as I intended it to. And what do you know? Check this out. So if we go back here, so this is our crankcase pressure. So you can look. So as we're climbing in boost, we're at 15 pounds right now. So our crankcase pressure, we're still in vacuum, 85 kPa, 101 to 103-ish is atmospheric pressure. That's the pressure that we're all experiencing right now. That's what this engine's experiencing sitting here not running. And we're at 85. So we're in vacuum, and then as we get up to red line here, at red line, bouncing off limiter, 14, 15 pounds of boost, we're at 102 kPa, which means there's just enough vacuum from the dry sump pump to fully offset the positive pressure from the boost, which is super, super exciting. That means the system is working as I intended it. We shouldn't have to worry about running a catch can. We shouldn't have to worry about spitting oil out of that filter because that shouldn't be opening. So what all that means is everything seems to be really happy and really healthy, which is great. I mean, that is exceptionally good news for a car that, you know, we built from the ground up and we did everything on. However, none of that means anything if the car doesn't drive well. It's completely irrelevant. If the car doesn't drive well and I'm not comfortable in it and I don't feel confident in it, none of the stats and the figures matter. None of the on paper stuff matters. Doesn't matter that we got better tires. Doesn't matter that we got a better fuel system or more power or a better transmission or a quick change. All of that is irrelevant because in my opinion, drifting is the most driver-oriented sport, as in the car makes less difference than any other motorsport, and that's my opinion on it. So because of that, if I'm not confident and comfortable in this car, if I don't like the way it drives, if I feel on edge while I'm driving it, I would be more competitive in this car, even though on paper it's way less capable. So that's really the biggest test for me. You know, the mechanical stuff is straightforward, but learning how a car drives and getting it to drive the way you want it, you know, that's the stuff that can be a lot more complicated to try to figure out, and there's a lot more room for interpretation on what it is. So this is the real test, and we're as ready as we can be. The time is now. I'm very excited, but I'm also anxious, curious. I'm really hoping it goes well. If we get through this well and the car drives great, I mean, there is a possibility that I jump in and already feel better than the Miata. You know, there's no way to know until we do it. So it's just time to do it. So I'm gonna get the trailer hooked up, get all this stuff loaded in the box, and we're gonna head to the track, and fingers crossed it all goes well. So I hope to see you guys for all of that, but for now, that's gonna be a wrap. The Corvette is ready for testing. Hopefully it's not a letdown. So hope to see you guys there, but for now, that's it. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. Goodbye.